There we go. So, welcome everybody to the Law Enforcement Community Engagement Committee presentation that is being given on trauma, self-care, and resilience for providers and law enforcement. And this is being presented by Tara Young, who is the Drug-Free Communities Program Coordinator at Healthy Acadia. And we are expecting Melissa Tozier, and we don't quite know what's happening with that. She works for the town of Bar Harbor as the Mental Health Liaison for the Bar Harbor Police Department. And we are very much looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you very much. And I'm sure, if Melissa had an emergency, that will take precedence over a presentation. So I know that the nature of her work is that it is unpredictable. So I hope that she'll join us in a little bit. But otherwise, I'm ready to go. And the way I present is very collaborative anyway, because while I have a lot of experience and expertise in this field, both through my work with DFC, my 25 years in the military, where I was a sexual assault prevention and response coordinator, suicide prevention officer, and a commander. I've had a lot of education, professional development, and experience in this topic, but all of you have as well. Being in law enforcement and in social services, we all have a lot of experience in education and expertise in trauma, self-care, resilience, secondary trauma, which we're also going to talk about. So I like to present in a very collaborative way. If you know something about any point that I'm bringing up, I would encourage you to just jump in and share it. Okay, there we go. So the agenda for what we want to talk about today, we're going to start with introductions, just so that we all get to know each other. And then I'm going to talk about the neurobiology of trauma and toxic stress, how to address trauma, both at the individual level, whether it's for ourselves as a helper, one-on-one. And we're also going to talk about the systems of addressing trauma. How do we address it as a system in our own work, community, whatever systems we're involved with? We'll look at a compassionate mental health model and talk about effective collaboration to address trauma in our work and community. So we'll start with introductions. I just want to know who everybody is, what they do or where they work, and 2 or 3 things that always make you smile. So I'll go first. My name is Tara Young. I work for Healthy Acadia. And 2 or 3 things that always make me smile are my kids, stupid puns, and little cats and dog videos, things like that. And then we can just go around popcorn style. Whoever wants to jump in can jump in.
I'll go. My name is Lisa. I work at the Emmaus Homeless Shelter, which is a family shelter. And things that make me smile are my kids. But first popped into my mind, my dog. And the kids here at the shelter. Oh, popcorn style. How about Karen?
Hi, I'm Karen. I work at Home Inc. I am one of the shelter managers here. And a couple things that make me smile are my grandson. He always makes me smile. And I guess my cats, they're crazy. And then next I'll say, is it Shemaya? Is that how it's pronounced?
It is, you got it just right. My name is Shemaya Laurel. I am one of the volunteers at the Law Enforcement Community Engagement Committee. I'm retired. I'm active in different community organizations in the area, especially Juneteenth down east and the Wabanaki Alliance. And a couple of things that make me smile, baby videos. Baby videos do it every single time. And we have squirrels that we give peanuts to here. And every time a squirrel comes and says, "Oh, can I have a peanut?" that makes me smile. And of course, we can't see everybody at the moment. Rhoda, would you like to go next?
Sure. My name is Rhoda Knott. I'm the executive director for Acadia Family Center. We're based out of Southwest Harbor, but serving the larger MDI community around substance use recovery, prevention, and education. And a couple of things that make me smile here lately, it's like peanuts, but I don't feed squirrels. I have a couple of families of blue jays that have adopted me since I moved into a new house. And they're out there every morning screaming at me for their peanuts. And then just generally, anytime I can get outside and do anything, go for a walk, a hike, whatever it is, that makes me smile. And I will throw it to, I'm not sure who went yet. I know Chief Hall didn't go, so I'll pick on him.
You're on mute still. Oh, doesn't say that you're on mute.
John, I wonder if your microphone.
Can you hear me now?
There we go. There you go.
Okay. No, I have too many devices attached to my microphone. So anyway, Chief Hall, Southwest Harbor Police Department. Things that make me smile: my family, 3 kids, 6 grandkids, and definitely my dog, who is present for this meeting.
Awesome.
So he may pop up on screen here every once in a while. And as far as anything else, one of the big things that was of importance to me with this meeting is that not only am I kind of in the trauma business, because that's kind of what we deal with, I'm also survivor of years of it, both military and law enforcement and family. So I truly am looking forward to today's meeting. And let me see if I can find someone else that hasn't gone yet. Well, my list is, how about Stacy?
Hello, my name is Stacy Herrick. I am the director and a housing navigator at the Emmaus Homeless Shelter in Ellsworth. Things that make me smile are definitely my children and them playing sports and stuff. I absolutely love that. My pets, like everybody else, we all love those animals. I have 4 dogs, 3 cats, and like 9 chickens. And chickens are hilarious. If you've never watched them, they're quite funny. But one of the biggest things that really makes me smile is seeing other people smile. And I will pick Rosa.
Thanks, Stacy. I'm the assistant director at Home Inc. Forgot what our prompts were, but things that make me smile. I think most people are picking kids, and I usually go down to, we have a daycare here, and every time I go down there, I can't help but smile when I see them. And let me think. We also do some arts and crafts, and that usually gets me excited and enthusiastic about what's going on when we see some people creating beautiful things. Let me see who else has not gone. Karen, did you go?
I've already gone, but Starla hasn't gone yet.
Starla's in. Thank you, Karen.
You're welcome.
Hi, Starla. I'm a shelter aide at Home Inc. Things that make me smile are my nephew, coffee in the morning, and sunsets. And Rebecca, have you gone?
No. So Starla, you Jackie's on your thing, so you're not Jackie?
No, so for
So
whatever
what's your
reason,
name?
Starla, Starla.
Okay. All right, I got it.
I don't know. I think Jackie's the one that set up Zoom on this computer, and I don't know how to change
Oh, okay.
it.
Well, anyway, so I wanted to ask you that question and you picked me, so that worked out. I'm Becky Wentworth. Conversation, really interesting conversation with people makes me smile. I'm wondering if people can see. Can you see? Can you see my plant?
Ooh, very nice.
Plants make me smile, especially when they do as well as that one. I've had a very good year at my landscaping project. That makes me smile. Uh, I guess that's it. So good conversation and plants that look really happy and healthy. Oh, pick some.
Oh, you went on mute, Becky.
Oh, well, I think Suzanne and Melissa haven't gone yet.
Well, I was just saying, I just had to change my view, and I was going to pick Suzanne. Came up to the top of my thing. So okay, Suzanne.
Well, hi there. Yeah, my name is Suzanne Jean. I live in Goldsboro, and I'm a community member of the Law Enforcement Community Engagement Committee. I'm retired. I have a background in higher ed administration, and I also was a massage therapist for about 18 years. Um, what makes me smile is listening to all of you folks and all the things that make you smile, because all those things make me smile too. So I'm going to pick Melissa now.
I also didn't get a chance to test my mic, and this one sometimes sounds a little like Mickey Mouse. So do I sound like a normal human?
You
You
do.
sound fine.
Oh, that's so good because I did not want that to happen. So my name's Melissa. I am the mental health liaison for the Bar Harbor Police Department. My primary role is emergency mental health within law enforcement and the community of Bar Harbor and Mount Desert Island. Things that make me happy. At home, I have a lot of animals. I have 4 dogs and 3 cats, and so they take up a lot of my time, but definitely really good for they're like weighted blankets. They love just to like lay on me. I have a Newfie and a Great Dane like on top of 2 smaller dogs. So but outside of home, I really love to travel. Anytime that I can travel, even if it's just like a day trip somewhere like in Maine, or of course, when I have the opportunity and the ability to travel further, that's something that I really like to do, just new experiences. And I think, did everybody go? I showed up late to the party. I'm not sure like who got missed, but if anybody else hasn't gone, please let me know and I'll call your name.
Is that everyone?
Okay. I think I was the last one.
Okay. So our first topic that we wanted to discuss is neurobiology of trauma and toxic stress. And if anybody joined late, I wanted to reiterate that this is going to be more of a facilitated discussion, since I know that everybody in here has experience and education with these topics. And individual experience is just as important as book learning and knowledge. So if you have anything that you want to add, remember that we're being recorded, but feel free to add that if you want to. So when we're talking about stress, there's lots of different kinds of stress. So basically the definition of stress is a situation or exposure that causes physical and emotional or psychological strain. And it can be any one of those or any combination of those. And what does it feel like in your body? How do you feel when you're under stress? What are some of the things that you feel? How do you know when you're experiencing stress?
The first place I usually feel it is right in my stomach. I get a knot in my stomach when I'm starting to get really stressed out.
Yeah, me
And
too.
my
I get that.
breathing too.
Yeah, that like that tightness, and it comes in my
Mhm.
stomach and in my chest. What else do people feel when they feel stress coming on?
Sorry. I get it in my chest and then it like goes down my arms. Like my arms start to feel really weird.
Yeah.
Just being overwhelmed, not clear-headed, just unfocused.
Is anybody starting to feel that now just talking about stress? Yeah, we do.
Loss of balance. I feel unbalanced. I drop things, or things just don't coordinate. Loss of coordination.
Yeah, and there's physical reasons for that. It's because of our nervous system. Our central nervous system is affected by stress. That's why I started out with talking about something that makes us smile, because that's a cognitive behavioral skill called hunt the good stuff. When we share something positive, it lowers our stress level. It makes us feel good. And when we hear other people sharing their good things, we have these receptors in our brains called mirror neurons. And when we hear people sharing happy things, we start to feel calmer and happy. So as we're getting ready to talk about stress, I wanted to do something to kind of inoculate us so we don't feel too stressed. So we talked about something that makes us smile. But we're going to start to feel a little bit stressed as we talk about stress, and this is going to be bringing things up for us. So it's going to be important to take a break, take a breath. If you need to just go off camera and walk around, take care of yourself, because that is the most important thing. So that's what stress is. There we are. Toxic stress is stress that's prolonged, frequent, or intense. Because stress doesn't have to be bad. We can feel a little bit of stress. I felt a little bit of stress right before this presentation. I'm like, I was excited, a little nervous, but there's that stress, and that kind of helps me focus and stay sharp and get organized and get it done. Because otherwise, if I felt no stress, I'd be like, I can put this off. I don't have to start it. We need that little bit of stress to get us motivated to do something, right? So toxic stress, though, is not helpful. It doesn't help us get things done. Helps us. It does not help us at all. It just makes us feel bleh. Anyone have anything to add about toxic stress?
I think one of the things that I think about toxic stress, to kind of put it in perspective a little bit, is like the walking on eggshells feeling. Like toxic stress is something that it's chronic, and it's always there, and it's mostly damaging when you don't have protective factors in place. So somebody can like constantly be under like stress of like fear of failure, like you don't have enough money to pay your bills, and that is like a constant toxic stress. But if you have like protective factors in place, like a supportive partner, or you have employment which can give you hope, which hope is something like really important when you're talking about resiliency. So like when I think about toxic stress, I think about that feeling of like walking on eggshells. Like it's uncomfortable and it's always there.
Perfect. Thank you. And trauma is something that happens too soon, too fast, too much for the mind and body to process. Something that is a negative experience that activates our central nervous system. And that's different from stress. It's more of an event focus. It's not something that is necessarily prolonged, but it will cause stress, and especially the recurring thoughts of the trauma can cause stress. Oh, there we go. Maybe. There we go. So secondary trauma is emotional duress that results from us hearing about the traumatic experiences of another. And so I wanted to talk about that because I know in law enforcement and in the helping professions, there is trauma, but there's also the secondary trauma when we keep hearing about really terrible things that have happened to other people, especially in law enforcement. And I would assume we're working with people in the homeless shelter. And when I worked at the Next Step, I know we sometimes have participants from the Next Step. We're constantly hearing about trauma that other people have experienced, and that is in and of itself a trauma when we hear about other people suffering. And that's because we have empathy. We have those mirror neurons, so we can experience joy when somebody is sharing a happy thought or talking about videos of kittens that can make us smile, even if we're not seeing the video of a kitten. But when somebody's talking about a traumatic event, we also experience trauma. Anybody else want to add anything about that? And then compassion fatigue is the emotional strain of exposure to others suffering from the consequences of traumatic events. I'm sorry, Rebecca.
I just need clarification. This is a new concept for me.
Okay.
These neurons, mirror neurons, what are they?
Yep. They are neurons in our brain that are
so they're actual neurons. They're
actual neurons in our brain. So many of our neurons have synapses that focus on each other. Mirror neurons are in our brains, and they are receptors that are focused on picking up micro expressions, body language, and information from other people around us. So if you think about it from a sociobiological standpoint, whether you believe in evolution or just or not, just think about it as hundreds of years of well, thousands and thousands of years of passing your DNA on down the line. When people have these mirror neurons that are responsible for empathy and being in tune with other people's emotions, think about it like back in cave people days. Why would we need to know really quickly how others are feeling? What's the survival benefit of that? Why would I need to know if somebody 20 feet away from me is scared or angry? How does that help me survive and pass my genes on to the next generation?
Okay, I got it. Thank you.
Yeah, so like if I'm walking through a forest and I'm hunting with my hunting party, and somebody 20 feet away from me does some sort of micro expression with their body that makes me think, oh, they're afraid. And it helps me become afraid really quickly and alert. And that stress gets me ready to fight the rhinoceros or whatever is coming at us that we're going to kill and eat, hopefully. So, and it helps us know if somebody is angry with us, so that we can be ready to defend ourselves. But it also works for positive emotions too, which is great. So that is how those mirror neurons work, but that they also will contribute to secondary trauma and just overwork and constantly helping other people and being under stress can lead to that compassion fatigue.
And
Shemaya, yeah.
Also, it seems like what you were saying about that when we see, like, say, in your example of the hunting folks,
yeah,
and you pick up on the other person is scared because you feel scared. Mm-hmm. And it seems like one of the challenges is, it's been a challenge for me in over time, is to even know that, oh, I got the other person's fear. Like I'm feeling the fear. What did that come from? Sometimes it's obvious, you saw the scared person in front of you, but sometimes that isn't so direct, understanding that. So
that's a really good point, Shemaya, because sometimes I can, all of us, we can pick up on nervousness, anxiety, fear, despair that has no tie to anything physically dangerous. It doesn't have to be a physical danger. It can be, we can be picking up on somebody's stress over financial stress, or sometimes people just have anxiety because they have anxiety. And if I'm around somebody that is constantly anxious, I might start to feel constantly anxious, even if their anxiety isn't tied to anything, because mental health conditions are real, you know, that they don't have to be actually afraid of anything specific or anything real, because our brains don't work that way. Sometimes that, you know, these things that were helpful thousands and thousands of years ago in our safer society, they aren't necessarily adaptive or as adaptive. In some ways they still are, and in some ways we still need them, but sometimes they go too far. And we're going to talk about that in just a couple of minutes with the neurobiology. They keep us anxious, especially when a lot of the things we're afraid of now are not physical dangers that we can outrun. So back in the day, when we were afraid of more things that were actual physical dangers, like that rhinoceros that's going to charge at me, I run away from the rhinoceros, I circle back around, my hunting party kills the rhinoceros. Then not only has my anxiety dissipated because all that adrenaline that was building up got used into my burst of energy that I had to do to sprint, you know, it dissipated all of that chemical that was building up and making me feel ugh. And then I felt that euphoria that you feel when you sprint, right? And I had the elation of killing the rhinoceros, and now we have food, and then there's that joy. So it balances. But when you can't run away from an anxiety or a fear or a trauma, we just have that adrenaline and we have that cortisol. And how do we get rid of it? What do we do? And we'll talk about that in a little bit because we have to get rid of it, right? And then burnout is a cumulative process of emotional exhaustion and withdrawal associated with increased workload, institutional stress. It doesn't necessarily have to be trauma related or completely trauma related, but they all, you know, work together. If there's trauma, it's definitely going to lead to more likelihood of burnout, especially when it's coupled with that consistent stress or toxic stress. Does anybody have anything more to add about that? I think many of us in these professions have even experienced burnout. I know I have at different times. I've had to do things to manage that. And there's a lot of feelings of guilt and that go along with burnout, because we feel like as helpers, we shouldn't feel the way we're feeling, but it's normal, and it's important to normalize that. Yeah, sometimes we're going to feel that.
And I think somebody has some background noise going.
I thought somebody maybe was going to say something about it, but I think it is background noise.
No, I was going to say, because I was just thinking about when you talked about like that healthy stress that you felt like right before when we started the meeting.
Yep.
And I got thinking about like the different types of stress, like besides just toxic stress, like the positive stress that you were talking about, which is that like brief burst in your heart rate that gives you like that little bit of energy. And then the toxic stress that we've been talking about, which is the, you know, prolonged unhealthy stress that changes the way your brain functions. But then in the middle, there's this like stress that's like tolerable stress or like tolerant stress, where it is like a serious stressor that causes dysregulation. It causes like a stress response. But the difference between that one and toxic stress is it's buffered by protective factors, and it's buffered by relationships, like caring relationships. So really there is that like third type of stress, but when it's not the prolonged one, it's still serious. But when you have the protective factors around it, that's what prevents these like tolerable stresses from becoming toxic.
Yeah, that's really good. And those protective factors are things that we can institute in our own lives, things that we can do for each other one-on-one. But most importantly, especially if we're in a leadership position, is things that we can start building into our institutions. How do we build in protective factors into the fabric of our institutions so that we can help protect people from burnout, from compassion fatigue, from secondary trauma? How do we make those stresses manageable? And how do we mitigate the stress that and the trauma that people are going to experience? So we'll talk about that. That's important. There we go. Oops, did I go the wrong way? Yes, I did. So a little bit more on neurobiology. How do our bodies get stuck on on? How do we get into that state where we're walking on eggshells? We feel that constant anxiety and stress. So our normal range, if our body's typical responses to the ups and downs, we feel stress, like I'm gonna have that peak right here. Boop, that first peak could maybe be like a job interview, something that's stressful but manageable. And it goes down, if it goes up and down, we have those protective factors. We get energized and we find ways to relax and we stay within that normal range. So we have the stresses, but they're all manageable. So we have protective factors, or we have personal practices that we can use, whether they're mindfulness practices or exercise. All of those things help us stay within that normal range. And maybe we're not experiencing anything super traumatic, so that helps us stay within that normal range for sure. And then if we have traumatic events, so those are those sharp peaks, that a trauma or a prolonged toxic stress, those are those longer plateaus that are above the energized. And we start living up in that higher stress area, it gets harder and harder for our bodies to come back down to normal. Has anybody ever felt that, where you've got this like really energized, oh my gosh, and it doesn't even have to be a huge trauma. Like I remember the first time that I played paintball with my military unit and I was in charge, and it was like, super intense paintball combat, but it's not real. And I knew, like my brain knew that nobody was going to die, even though I was losing people to paintball. It was upsetting whenever any of my people died, even though it was paintball and I knew that they were going to come back the next round. That night when I went to bed, I could not sleep. I did not sleep at all that night. And I was like, wow, how do people ever get to sleep after a real combat? Like I was so awake and I was so like, just like energized, and I could not calm down. And I'd been teaching resilience skills at this point for probably 2 years. And I'm like, I can't get my body back down into the normal range. And I tried everything I knew. And it took me in like 2 days just to calm back down into that normal range. And that was just from paintball. It wasn't real combat. It was simulated combat. And that's why we do that in the military. We have that simulated combat over and over again so that we can learn to bring our bodies back down, so that when it comes to the real thing, luckily I never experienced that, but if it did come to the real thing, I would have had some skills to do that. Does that make sense? So does anybody ever experience something like that, where they did something, whether it's positive or negative, something really exciting that your body's like on and you can't come back down?
And did you find the ways to come back down from that after that
Yeah,
time?
A lot of it was just time. My body needed time to process through all of that adrenaline that had built up. And I needed to do what we're gonna do next. I needed to do a lot of the combat breathing that I'd been taught. I needed to go out, and I ran like 6 miles the next morning. And that's not typical for me. My normal was 2 miles. but I ran 6 miles because I had so much adrenaline. I had so much energy that just needed to be worked out. So exercises are really helpful. We all need an exercise practice because that really helps us get that adrenaline and cortisol out of our body. Chief Hall.
So back in the old days, we would react to what you are describing in the, we would either drink it away, laugh it away. Usually what we were doing to unwind or to try and turn off was through some sort of chemical use. Sometimes it was, just pick one, but that in our profession, both law enforcement and in the military, that was one of the primary causes of a lot of the burnout, a lot of the dependency problems, and all kinds of other issues. Just exactly what you were describing. And then whether again it was either real or simulated. And it probably wasn't until the late 90s, early 2000s when they started doing, taking the steps to try and correct our behavior to those, to that stimulus and our reaction to that, either with critical incident debriefings or, teaching rescue breathing, trying to do it the right way to save the individuals that we were, systematically destroying. So it's good to hear that, I've seen it now, and I'm a big proponent of doing it the right way versus the wrong way. Yeah. So I think that was, a good example of what actually is a lot of the causation factors, especially with some of the veterans and, some of us, in law enforcement that's struggled through it and survived or didn't survive. So thank you.
That's a really good point. In alcohol would have worked in the short term. If I had taken a couple of shots, it would have brought my regulation down. But when I'm in that state, my brain is also much more susceptible to addiction. Trauma changes the physical structure of our brains. Even if it's little traumas like playing paintball, I wouldn't call that a trauma. That was more of an activating event. I had fun. It was great. And I've played paintball with my children and not been that activated. Why do you think that the thought of my own children getting hit with paintballs was not as stressful to me as playing paintball with my military group?
Why do I think that?
Yeah, why do you think that?
Oh, very easy, because with your family, it is, you just know it's fun.
Yeah.
There's no visual, you know, exactly. They're not wearing uniforms.
Yep.
They're not your combat buddies. They're not that. We used to do pillow fights with our kids. Absolute blast. It was one of the greatest stress relievers I've ever encountered. But when we would do it, we would, after a paintball training with law enforcement, you start throwing things around, bales of hay and stuff. It gets much more intense. It's your perception, your immediate surroundings, I think, is what the difference is.
Exactly. With kids, it's just fun and games. It's just a fun game. When I'm doing this with my military unit, especially as a leader, I was the commander. Like, the thought of me being responsible for them in life and death was overwhelming, and even losing them in a fake thing, I felt like I failed. Like, I lost a soldier, and it was so traumatic. It was hard to deal with that, and I love my kids, but them getting hit with a paintball was hilarious. But losing a soldier to a paintball, I felt like I'd failed. Like I didn't want anybody to die. I didn't want to lose anybody, even when it was fake, even when I knew it was fake, and even when I knew the training value of it. It was hard. It was really hard.
Well, one thing that I was thinking is when you're under stress, there's certain parts of your brain that control memory. And when you're under a lot of stress, it's actually, I mean, we'll talk about it a little bit later, but it's called the hippocampus. And when you're under serious stress, your hippocampus, it shrinks a little bit, or it doesn't work properly. It mostly shrinks under like prolonged toxic stress. But even when you're under short periods of stress, your hippocampus is affected, and your hippocampus basically controls your memory, your ability to decipher between past and present. And I feel like that could have been just like a neurobiological reason why like you were more stressed out when you were playing paintball with your military team, because you were actually firing a gun. There was this like simulated experience, and under that amount of stress, your hippocampus wasn't necessarily able to decipher between past and present.
Yeah, absolutely. Rebecca, you have your hand up.
Yes. I quick note about being a lifeguard.
Oh.
And as a lifeguard for 15 years, aquatic director, camp, and then private pools as well. And so my experiences in those situations is a very kind of lonely experience dealing with stress, in that in those positions, whether you're a lowly lifeguard, which lifeguards are often thought of and treated as and paid for, you are basically, either one in a pool or two or three, spread out over long pieces of water. There's not a lot of, what did you say, Hall? Chief Hall, you said something about breakdown, people getting together and talking about situations and how they handled them. There wasn't a lot of that. And I don't know if there still is or not, but it's something that, the lifeguard profession really should be dealing with, or I felt. I haven't been there for 10 years, so I don't know what's happened with it. But I think it's one of the reasons why so many people leave the profession, other than being horrendously underpaid. So just wanted to share that.
Thank you.
And I'd also say too, the power of role play is really strong. So like it wasn't a role play with your kids. It's a defined game. This is what we're doing. And what it was with your unit was this is a role play of an actual situation where people are getting shot and you're carrying that responsibility. So that kind of makes perfect sense to me that one would be so loaded, because role play works. You do role plays for all kinds of stuff and you're in it. You're really in it. So
and that's why it's important to do those kinds of training exercises, because stress is also an inoculation. Once we've learned how to handle stress, we have these little stresses, like when kids have pets and they lose a gerbil, and they know that they're sad, but we have the rituals, we have the family support, we give them the care and support that they need. They get through that stress and that loss of losing a gerbil, and then maybe they lose another pet, and then possibly they lose a grandparent, and that's how we learn that we can go on through even really big losses. We have to have those experiences, and they make us stronger when we have support around us, when we have support and those protective factors that Melissa has talked about. Once we get through something, it makes us stronger when we have support. So that leads us into a really good place to talk about how our central nervous system is affected by stress, toxic stress, trauma, and how supports help with that. So we've got our central nervous system, and it is affected by toxic stress, trauma, secondary trauma, and all that. And it can lead to a smaller prefrontal cortex over time, which gives us difficulty with executive functioning. So making those big decisions. Anybody's, when you're really stressed out and somebody's like, what do you want for lunch? And you're like even making small decisions is just overwhelming. It's hard. It's exhausting. And you're like, I just can't. Or you come home from a stressful day of work and your partner wants to be helpful. It's like, I'll make you anything you want for dinner. And you're like, I just can't. Just make something. I don't care. You can't even make a decision. That's how that affects our prefrontal cortex, our executive functioning. Our amygdala gets overstimulated. I've seen really great hand metaphors for our amygdala. Amygdala is a little almond-shaped structure in the middle of our brain that helps us to regulate emotion. And when it gets overstimulated, we get into this into that that fight, flight, or freeze point where we're just we're in that constant state of we're just ready to either run away or fight or shut down. And then our Melissa talked about the hippocampus a little bit. When we're under stress, our memories are impaired. Has anybody been under stress for like a few months or a few weeks, or especially it can be paired with sleeplessness a lot of times? And somebody will be talking, you get through it and somebody will be talking about it, or you'll read some emails from that time and you're like, wow, I have no memory of this, or why did I think that, or why did I make this decision? And you're just like, I can't even remember what my thought process was, or I don't even remember the situation at all. Has anybody ever, like, I've definitely gotten through periods like that where I read my diary from that time and I'm like, wow, I have no memory of any of this because it just didn't encode, because our hippocampus is so impaired from lack of sleep and from overstimulation, and that stress just impairs our memory functions. And then our vagus nerve can be disrupted too. So it makes it really difficult to regulate our emotions. Our vagus nerve is something that can be really affected by our practices of mindfulness and breathing, which brings us to when we have mindfulness, self-care, institutional support, individual support, relationships, that helps to mitigate the effects of trauma and toxic stress. So, if I'm in that position where I'm feeling all that stress, and I do some breathing, or somebody gives me some actual things, I can start to have that mitigating, that protective factor will help increase my cognitive functioning again. It will protect against that happening, and over time I won't have a consistent difficulty with executive functioning. My prefrontal cortex will not become smaller if I have those protective factors in place. There we go. And if I have those mindfulness practices and the support, whether it's institutional or individual, it can help me keep my amygdala regulated. It can lead to my hippocampus remaining functional or becoming functional again. And it can help me regulate my vagus nerve. So we're going to go right into, do you have anything you want to add to any of this, Melissa?
Yeah, sure. So when I think about stress and trauma and how it affects the brain, it really comes down to cortisol being released every time we're under stress or trauma. The hormone cortisol is released, and cortisol is the run like hell, fight like hell hormone. Like, it really gets us ready to protect ourselves. And when it affects the amygdala and hippocampus, I specifically call this response Big Amy Little Hippo. It's just easy to remember. So with Big Amy Little Hippo, just like Tara said, the amygdala gets overstimulated, and this specifically happens by the cortisone increasing activity levels in number of neuron connections, which basically makes your fear center go nuts. It wreaks havoc on your brain. And then what the cortisol does to your hippocampus is it deteriorates the electronic signals within your hippocampus. So it shrinks it. And this is why it's called Big Amy Little Hippo. And, you know, the amygdala, like, Amy is wired for survival. Like, that is its job. And so when the cortisol just becomes, it's just pumping right into it, and it's just becoming more overactive, you really get stuck in that, and it's hard to rationally think. And that's one of the biggest things that I personally feel with Big Amy, because I'm a person who struggles with an anxiety disorder, and it takes a lot of work, but I'm not perfect. And there are times where the stress just kind of gets to me a little bit, and I spin out in a stress response. And I kind of tell myself, like, hold up, Big Amy. Like, I just really kind of like talk to the limbic system in my brain just to kind of reality check myself a little bit, and just to know that this is just a brain response that's happening. And so I kind of do find that helpful, just to be aware. And Tara was talking about the vagus nerve, and this is probably going to be one of your biggest tools to like help re-regulate yourself. The vagus nerve is part of a parasympathetic nervous system. It's part of the rest. We have like nervous systems that, like, the opposite of that is the sympathetic. It's the one that's like, let's go. My heart rate is going to go up. I'm going to start sweating. Blood is going to be pumping to all the extremities of my body, and I'm ready to do whatever I need to do to protect myself in a situation that feels threatening or hostile, or really just even unpredictable, because a lot of situations that are stressful can just be unpredictable. Like, I don't know what's going to happen, and that's stressing me out. But when you activate, like when you work on your vagus nerve, it really, it's like the rest part of your central nervous system. It starts to lower the heart rate, it starts to lower the blood flow, you start not to become sick to your stomach anymore, like through that parasympathetic nervous system. And you can do that just by, like Tara said, deep breathing exercises is a big one, or singing and humming. That really helps activate your vagus nerve too. And then like cold exposure and things like that. But this is just like really, it could be like a lot of information, but there are ways, I guess, to like shrink and grow and just like re-regulate your brain. It just takes practice and work and time.
And I think one of the most important things for me, for everything that, I've been through a lot of stressful situations. I've had a lot of stressful jobs. I've been through a lot of stressful things. One of the things that has been most helpful has been, as I learn more about how my brain works, and it's just normal, I go, oh, I know what's happening. It is so calming just to know that, oh, this is this response, this is why it happens, and this is what I can do to calm it back down. It's really empowering. It's so much less scary when you start experiencing, like, the memory loss. Like, I had an extreme stress a year or so ago, a couple of years ago, and like, I was losing my wasn't encoding memories, and like all this stuff is happening, but I knew why. So it wasn't nearly as scary as if it had been happening and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm losing my mind. Like, what is going on? You're so much calmer about it when you know why it's happening and what to do about it. So having these professional developments, making sure that, if we've got a friend that's going through trauma, just giving them a brief rundown, being like, oh, that's totally normal. This is happening because of this, like, I can't sleep and this is happening. And you say, yeah, that's normal. Just that validation that, yeah, that's what our brains do, is so calming, I think. And knowing what's going on and how to deal with it is really helpful. So one of the things that we can really do when we start to feel, I love how you put that big Amy, when our amygdala is getting activated and we're feeling dysregulated. When we first started this in the Army, they called it mindfulness or some other breathing, and soldiers were really resistant to that. Like, I'm not doing that. So then when we started calling it tactical breathing and like talking about it, like when you're shooting, at a firing range, how you have that pause. We're just gonna kind of do that, but in a more longer manner. So when you're shooting and you have that pause that you between the intake and the outtake, that's when you shoot. We're going to do some tactical breathing like that. So that seemed much more acceptable to them, because there was a stigma about, I don't know why, but there was a stigma about incorporating mindfulness. But tactical breathing was something that was very acceptable. So a lot of it is about finding something that's acceptable to the people that we're trying to help. So tactical breathing is something that I think pretty much any police officer, military person, even the toughest of tough people are going to be fine with trying. And it's really easy. And I want you all to give it a try. We'll do 4 rounds. It's 4 breaths in, 4 seconds of hold, 4 seconds, or not 4 breaths in, but 4 seconds of breathing in. I'm sorry. 4 seconds of holding it, 4 seconds of breathing out, and then 4 seconds of pause. And do that 4 times. And I think by the time you've gone through 4 rounds, you'll feel like a lot calmer. I'm feeling a little stressed just talking about stress. So we'll give this a try. I'm just gonna let everybody do it on their own, and we'll go. Is everybody done? How do you feel? Suzanne?
Like I want to take a nap.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah, I felt pretty relaxed immediately after the last breath.
I always get out of breath when I'm doing that exercise. I'm like, it's too long. I think if I did it for 2 seconds, especially on the hold after you breathe out, it actually gets stressful because it's like, oh, I can't breathe.
And so you can modify it if that's too much. Like, we all have different lung capacity. Some people I know do 6, 6, 6, 6,
wow.
because they've got, they're big people who are very athletic and they've got big lung capacity. 4 is kind of stretching it for me. I have asthma, so if I do more than 4 rounds, I'm like, so sometimes I do 4, 4, and then I do 3, 3. And sometimes I do, like if I'm trying to get ready to go to sleep, I'll do 5, 4, 3, 2, and sometimes I'm asleep before 2, honestly. But yeah, it's really useful. It's a really good thing to try. And okay.
And I just want to say I'm sorry for turning my video off some. Suzanne and I are in the same house, and our internet doesn't always sustain both of us on our computers. So I'll pop on and off. It seems to be better now.
So these mindfulness practices, breathing exercises, this is something we can do at the individual level as a protective factor. Learning these things, just learning about why our brains are doing the things that they're doing, incorporating the mindfulness and the breathing exercises. What we did at the beginning when we talked about something that makes us smile, hunting the good stuff every day. If we make a practice of finding something that we're grateful for that makes us happy, 3 good things that happen every day. If you can do that for 30 days, it actually changes the physical structure of your brain, and it can lead to a more optimistic thinking style. It lowers your anxiety and stress. It's a great thing to try. And there's a lot of different ways to incorporate that into your life. You can do it like through journaling. You can do it with members of your family when you sit down for dinner. I always use this with my kids, like, what's one good thing for each of them that happened that day? And then I'll do it before bed, like, tell me one good thing that happened today. Just trying to help them hunt for the good stuff in every day, because even in the worst day, something good happens. Even if I have a really, really bad traumatic day, I can find something good. Usually somebody somebody helped me if something bad happened. Like I got in a car accident, but somebody stopped and helped. There's something good that happens, and there's something good that we can find in every single day. And helping our brains look for that lowers our anxiety, changes the structure of our brain, and helps us to be more optimistic. And it's a very strong protective factor for keeping our anxiety levels in check. And then how do we address trauma, secondary trauma, and stress? I'm going to talk a little bit about that. First, we have to know that it's happening. So how do we know that it's happening with us or with a coworker, with a friend or a family member? Some of the things that we might notice are an inability to pay attention to detail, or just being hyper aroused, that reaction, startle reactions, anything else that people notice, like with inattention or over arousal. What are some things that might look like for you or for people that you know?
Well, I think when I'm under stress, a type of over arousal I might have is like just more irritability, like things that wouldn't typically upset me. I find myself getting upset about like little things that wouldn't necessarily be a big deal. And that's just because like hypersensitivity, I guess, is the way I want to like word that. So I become like hypersensitive.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially in teenagers, and since our society is still not as accepting of men showing fear and sadness, anger and irritability are especially common in teens when they're experiencing trauma. So that it might come out as more anger and irritability, and sadness and withdrawal. People might start to just wall themselves off from other people, from other activities. You might, especially with teens, you might see a lot more phone. They're just kind of glued to their phone watching YouTube, because it's a way for their brain to kind of calm down, but it becomes addictive because our brains can, with video games or those those short videos that release dopamine. It's a way to get our brains to calm down, but then we become dependent on that and we're not dealing with the trauma. So it's not adaptive in the long run. And then if things get really progressed, then depression, alienation, and isolation can happen. And in severe cases, dissociation, hallucinations, or psychosis can result because of extreme trauma that is untreated and without protective factors. Anything else anyone else wants to add about that? So when a person has experienced trauma, supportive relationships are huge in helping reduce the likelihood of traumas of becoming a long-term problem. They've done a lot of research. When I was a child protective worker, they did a lot of research that I was exposed to that showed that when kids disclosed abuse to an adult, that the likelihood of them experiencing long-term problems was much lower if the first person they told believed and supported them. It was dramatically the thing that explained the most variation in outcomes, even more so than the severity of the abuse, is the first response of the person that they disclosed the abuse to. Were they believed and were they supported? So when somebody experiences a trauma, it's not necessarily even for us adults, it might not be whether we're believed. Like people might believe that, I had a rough day at work, but do they validate that? Is that validated? Or is it minimized? If I come home and I'm like, oh man, I had such a rough day. And, the person I tell is like, yeah, me too, and blah, blah, blah. And, tries to like one up, like my day was so much more stressful than yours. That's not supportive. Or if they're like, well, duh, you chose this line of work. What did you think? You're going to be exposed to kids that have experienced trauma. You're going to be exposed, if they're not, if my feelings aren't validated, then it adds to that trauma. Or I feel, my feelings aren't taken seriously, or if someone's like, yeah, whatever, doesn't really listen. And it's hard because, maybe my partner who I'm telling had a really rough day too. And, maybe we're both in a line of work that's really stressful. That can be really difficult. So how do we stay mindful and present and be supportive? That's a really important thing. And so when somebody is experiencing that, they might not even share it. So it's important that we say, hey, how are you doing? Sometimes we need to be proactive with our support, to make sure that people are getting the support that they need. Does that make sense? And that it's a huge protective factor. Like if we check in with people and say, hey, how are you doing? Or I know that you went out on this call, or you saw this client and I know how stressful that might have been. Do you want to talk about it? That can be something that builds in a protective factor for them. If we're all just mindful of the experiences of our coworkers, of our family members, of our partners, and we're proactive in asking them about that, and we're really mindful and staying in this supportive mindset, like how can I respond in a way that is validating and that is supportive. And with kids, that can be hard too, because we're like, oh, you think that that's traumatic. Back in my day, things like that are invalidating. Everybody's trauma is their own and their own experience. And sometimes we might think as parents or as leaders that we're toughening people up by telling them, is what it is, suck it up, those things that we say. But research shows that doesn't help us become tougher. What helps people become tougher is for us to listen and validate and give them some tools to deal with that. Melissa?
I think kind of right along with that, when we talk about relationships and protective factors, the condition is not relationships. The condition is quality of relationships. And that makes a significant difference in the likelihood of somebody being able to grow through hardship. So, like, you can have a whole bunch of you can have a bunch of friends or you can have some family members, but like you're saying, like if the relationship isn't mutually caring, then there's not quality and it doesn't matter. So the condition is quality relationships, and that's important.
Absolutely. And another thing that I found interesting, another study, I couldn't find it for this, but I remember reading it years and years ago. They did a study with trauma in combat, and they looked at post-traumatic stress disorder, post-traumatic stress response, and post-traumatic growth. And they found that even in really traumatic, stressful combat conditions, that soldiers experience post-traumatic growth when they had supportive, high quality leadership. And so that's leaders that did a good after action review, that validated, yeah, that was a tough assignment, that, just that modeled good self-care, that modeled seeking treatment when they need it. And those people did really well, and the units performed well together, building that culture of support and mutual support, and getting help when they need it, really led to much better outcomes. People are much less likely to experience post-traumatic stress responses and post-traumatic stress disorder when they are supported and validated after that traumatic event.
I really love post-traumatic growth, and I didn't know what that was until a couple of years ago. And post-traumatic stress is breaking down, and post-traumatic growth is growing stronger. And there is this term, it's called anti-fragility. And it means, basically, I've heard it referenced to like resilience 2.0. So resilience is being able to bounce back from adversity, and post-traumatic growth or anti-fragility is bouncing forward from adversity. And I just really, I love that concept. And I just learned about it a couple of years ago, and I think that when we are going through like a hardship or adversity of any kind, there is always a possibility to grow from it, even if it's like really painful, and it might not happen immediately because it takes healing. You have to like build skills and tools and heal from the stress, but post-traumatic growth is possible. And it's possible like not only just to bounce back from it, but to bounce forward.
And another thing that I found really interesting in the research is that even after a post-traumatic stress response, people can bounce back from that and become very strong. And it's like a broken bone. They're strong at the broken place. If we break a bone, when it heals, it's even stronger. So breaking doesn't necessarily mean that somebody is weak. It just means that at that point, they broke. And that's as much a failure of systems, or I think it's only a failure of systems, because when something happens that breaks a person, we're all strong. Every human being is strong. When a person breaks, that's a system failure, not an individual failure. And they can become stronger with support even after somebody breaks, if they whatever they define as being, having a post-traumatic stress response or disorder, people can become strong with support, and over time. And those are some of the strongest people I've ever met, are people that have been through extreme traumas and come through it and understand the trauma, and then don't create more trauma, and understand the trauma and understand how to support and have the desire to support people that are experiencing trauma. Those are the strongest people. Stacy.
So I agree with all of that. But I always have to be the one who does this type of stuff. And I apologize for that. And I'm not trying to be disrespectful, but
okay.
Isn't there always a time where someone has experienced so much trauma, though, that they can't bounce back, and that no matter how much support that they are given, I mean, if they have, had such trauma so many times that it gets to the point where they can't fully heal?
I don't know. I think that there is, I don't think that our society is perfect. And I think that a lot of times people, especially living in poverty, like poverty is such a huge stress. And then there's so much more trauma. I know when I was a child protective worker, I was shocked by how often kids were abused and re-abused. And I'm like, how does that happen? Like I thought most, most things, especially like, things like stranger sexual abuse would be like a random occurrence. And I see these kids getting abused over and over again by multiple people. And I'm like, and it's a condition of poverty and neglect, and people are predators against these people. And they're just put into horrible situations. And there are people that are just, put in these horrible situations, and they don't get the support and care and stability that they need. And without getting the support and care and stability, it will be very difficult. But some people, there's always hope, and there's always hope that somebody will get everything they need. And sometimes it can feel like you're pouring into an empty hole, that you're going to give them as much support and help as you possibly can, and nothing changes. And that can lead to burnout, because you feel like you're giving, and it's not helping.
And do you think that is where like the mental health problems come into play? When there's been so much trauma and not enough support, where that's where people become, or in some instances are diagnosed with like PTSD and that type of stuff.
Yeah, and I know that in a perfect world, it would be a lot of these traumas never happen. That would be the perfect world. The big traumas never happen. And when the big traumas do happen, they get immediate, overwhelming support. But we know that doesn't happen. But I think that helps also with preventing burnout is you have to set your own boundaries and know when you need to tap out and get some help and get somebody else to provide them the support. But knowing that you're doing all that you can and making sure that they get the needs met by somebody else when you can't do it, knowing that that this is important, and trying to provide that support, even if it doesn't prevent them from having post-traumatic stress disorder, or even if it doesn't completely mitigate, you're still making it better. There's still growth. There's still they're getting better than they were. And it's hard when you're doing this work, or when I do prevention work, I don't know what I'm preventing, because you can't see what happens, and you don't know how much worse it would be for a person if you hadn't provided the help and support. You don't know what would happen. So it can seem like we're not making a difference, but we are making a difference. Those relationships, those quality, caring relationships, do make a difference. Even when it doesn't feel like it is, you're definitely still making a difference. But yeah, I mean, we're still not going to prevent every incidence of post-traumatic stress disorder, or we're not going to make sure that nobody ever gets overwhelmed to the point where they can't handle it, but we're doing the best we can.
And the stuff you've said about how folks who are providing those services are using self-care to be able to be okay in that work. That seems so crucial. and
and
having
setting
those
boundaries is
connections.
really important. I think that we can get overwhelmed and we can feel like this person isn't getting better. I need to do more. But there's only so much one person can do. You need to set those boundaries for yourself, because if you get burnout, then you're not helping anybody. You're not helping yourself. You're not helping all the other people who need you. So we need to find ways of going, okay, this is what I can give. And then I need to say, I need help. I need somebody else to come in and do this for a while. I need to find another thing for this person. And if people don't want to accept help, it can be hard too. I mean, it's not perfect. Like, you can know what somebody needs, but if they're not ready for it, you can't make them. We can support, we can offer, we can do all of that, but we can't, we can't do things for people. We just have to empower them to take the resources that are available and do what we can. Does that answer your question? Did I get there?
Yeah, no, I agree with all of it. I just, I see it as we all do with the people that we work with, and sometimes within ourselves, when there are so many levels of stress and traumatic events and trauma that have happened to one individual. And sometimes they get to the point and they feel like they're never going to feel better. Like they're never not going to be stressed, but
Right.
it all makes sense. I mean,
yeah. And that's something that I find really interesting too. Is like, there are some things that people will tell me that I'm like, and they're perfectly happy, well-adjusted people, and I know what they've been through. And I'm like, how is that even possible? Like, if I had experienced what you'd experienced, I don't think I could have done it. And then other people are falling apart, and you're like, are you freaking serious? And it's hard not to be judgmental, be like, really? Wow, I'm so in awe of your first world problems. Like, you have to have a loaner car that's 2 years old, and you're embarrassed to drop your kids off in it, and people are like stressing about that. And it's hard to have empathy for your friend that's telling you these things. You're like, really? Yeah, okay. That's their trauma, and it's hard not to judge sometimes.
And
you know
also,
have both.
often it's connected to something that's a
Yeah,
lot more significant, and
yeah,
how they're expressing
exactly.
stress is the wrong model car, but the reason they're stressed is really bigger than that. It helps me to
Yeah,
remember that when people are needing support for things that seem kind of.
yeah. And it can be really hard to provide support when we perceive that somebody's trauma is not valid. But does it really cost me anything to still be supportive and validating? To be a good friend to my friend who thinks that showing up in the wrong model car, what does that cost me, Rebecca?
I'm just thinking of expectations and, being in communities where there's a lot of stress, and what you, for instance, working with people with drinking problems. And I've wrestled with, this idea that you have to fall to the bottom before you're supposed to help them. And that just absolutely ticks me off, because often if you let them fall to the bottom, if you don't offer any kind of help, in this case, maybe monetary or housing is what I'm thinking of, then they're likely to die. And so I have a limit of this letting people fall to the bottom. My expectation is to give as much help as I can within that level. Anyway, that's just one gripe I have with that particular thing that goes over. It's like, that does not give me an excuse just to say, oh, I can't do anything, walking away from this. It's like, I can do something, whatever little that is, that's going to be enough. And if they live another day, we're doing good.
That's a really interesting whole nother topic. But yeah, like our own mental constructs around we have a lot of ideas that don't really, like, cultural ideas around who to help, when to help, what kind of help, how people should react to the help we offer, that are not necessarily based on how our brains work. They're just cultural constructs that we have this individualistic, pull yourself up by your bootstraps mentality that is our response to trauma is kind of like, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And it's very individualistic. And that's not the way our brains work. And everybody has a different response to trauma. And everybody perceives like I might experience a really traumatic event in category A and have another experience in category B that somebody else would consider much more traumatic than category A. But I think category B was just Tuesday, and it doesn't bother me. Maybe I experience a car accident that somebody else would have flashbacks for months. And then I experience, like a social humiliation that I brush off. And for Melissa, it might be exactly the opposite. They might experience those two traumas in the exact opposite way as I do. Everybody's reaction to each trauma is individual. Everybody's reaction to stress is individual. And it's not useful for me or anyone else to judge what they find traumatic or stressful. But I can validate and I can listen and I can offer resources and I can offer support and hope, no matter what somebody else is experiencing. And when I find, when I find myself reacting to something, that's often a really good opportunity for me to reflect and go, why do I want to invalidate this trauma for them? What is it it's a me problem. Like, why do I want to invalidate their problem? Why do I want to not support them through this? What is it about this person or this experience that I'm feeling this feeling over? That's a good opportunity for me to reflect on that and really learn something about myself.
Yeah. And also just to toss out there, Becky, like programs like AA have changed on that thing that used to say people have to hit bottom and make their decision to come out of it. And now folks who are providing guidance in there are saying, no, people die, just like what you were saying, Becky. And so it's much more about, yes, if you have that bandwidth, if you can do it within what your boundaries are, yes, helping people is good. Thank goodness people have come around on this.
And I'm being mindful of time. We are running out of, we've run out of time. I just wanted to, these are for us as an individual and for organizations to build a trauma responsive culture within ourselves and within our organizations. We want to avoid judgment and assumptions, have healing centered and trauma responsive practices, be affirming and respectful in using person-centered language. These are all more things that we can talk about for another hour and a half each. And hopefully we will do that in the future. Being inclusive and accepting of diverse cultures, genders, perspectives, and experiences, and building a strength-based and hopeful language and culture and response to trauma. And then I just have a couple of, I'll make this available. These are more on ways that we can be trauma responsive in our organizations, how we can provide support. But we've run out of time, so we can talk about this more at a future presentation. I just wanted to make sure we had time for questions. I took out 90% of my slides and still ran out of time. I'm so sorry. But it's been a great discussion, and we can go have another session in the future.
I think before we go, just kind of the last thing that I wanted to add is when we talk about building resilience, 3 things I find are so important: love, change, and serotonin. So love, building mutually caring relationships; change your circumstances and your situation; build tools and skills; to understand your emotion. So love, change, and serotonin. And serotonin is just another chemical in our brain. It's medication for brain health, and you can get that through SSRIs through your doctor. You can get it naturally through exposure to more sunlight, exercising more. It's something that we can naturally produce. So
eating carbs.
Yes, eating carbs. So
yeah.
love,
healthy
change,
carbs,
and
healthy
serotonin.
complex carbs. I love that. Thank you, Melissa. Does anybody have any questions that are burning before we go?
Yeah, did you just say you were going to share your slides?
Absolutely.
And is it going to be a Google share or a link that I can put in my Google?
Shemaya, did I send you the slides?
You did not, but I
Okay,
can.
I will send them to you.
So, yep.
I will send you the downloaded Microsoft copy, and I will also share the Google link.
Tremendous.
Oh, Google link. Good. Thank you.
And how would you like to switch the screen back so we can see everybody before we all go?
There we go.
Beautiful. Thank you. And I just really want to thank everybody for coming here today. And did folks have other things they wanted to say? I'm sorry, I jumped that a little fast there. You folks have thoughts to share? No?
I actually like running out of time because it means that people participated.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah,
I'm happy to run out of time and do the rest of a presentation at a later date.
Yep.
I'm much more about quality interaction than getting through every slide.
Absolutely. And this has been fantastic, Tara and Melissa. Thank you so very much for coming and doing this. And we'll have the recording so that if we set up to do a follow-up program for the things, all those great slides at the end that we didn't get to dig into, then people can watch this one. So it won't have to be that, oh, you need to do all this kind of review to get to that. So thank you ever so much.
Thank everybody for your participation. I like it so much when people talk than if I get really nervous when I'm just babbling away.
Oh,
really
and I wanted, yeah, it came out so good. And I just want to say for anybody who's watching this who was not here or just happened to see the link, this can be found at our website for the Law Enforcement Community Engagement Committee is www.lecec.org. And it'll take a little time before it's actually posted there, but that's where you can go and to see other programs that we've hosted in the past. So thank you very much, everybody, for being here. And I'm going to shut off the recording.
Great.